The night had teeth, and it was biting deep. A crimson moon, swollen and unnatural, bled its eerie light over the jagged peaks of the Obsidian Mountains. Below, in the ancient forest, howls pierced the stillness, not songs of the hunt, but cries of a pack in agony. Their alpha's heart had been torn out, not by claws, but by a theft so brazen it shook the very foundations of their world. His infant son, his heir, his pup, was gone. Kalen Thorn, alpha of the Shadow Moon Pack, moved like a phantom through the silver-dappled trees. He did not run with his warriors. He stalked. Each measured step on the frost-hardened earth was a promise of violence to come. His wolf raged beneath his skin, a tempest of fury held back by a will of iron. The world was a blur of shadow and crimson, but one thing burned with crystal clarity: his all-consuming rage. Someone had slipped past his guards into his most sacred den and stolen the most precious part of his soul. They would not live to see another moonrise. For hours they followed a trail as faint as a whisper. The scent was a confusing tapestry: the sweet milk smell of his pup, the sharp tang of pine sap, and beneath it all, something soft, human, fragile, fleeting. It was the scent of the thief, and Kalen's wolf latched onto it, tasting her desperation on the wind, the frantic rhythm of her human heart. As the first grim light of dawn threatened the horizon, the trail led them to the broken stones, the ruins of a forgotten temple where only ghosts and memories lingered. The forest here was utterly silent. No bird dared chirp, no creature stirred. Kalen raised a clenched fist, and 24 warriors melted into the shadows, surrounding the crumbling stone structure. "She is inside, Alpha," murmured Fenrir, his most trusted tracker. "The pup's scent is strong here." Kalen's voice was a low vibration, colder than the mountain streams. "If she runs, bring her to me, alive. I will have answers before she draws her last breath." He stepped forward alone. His boots crunched on the gravel in the dead courtyard. The massive rotted door groaned open under his touch, exhaling a draft of damp, decay, and milk, and wool, and warmth. The scent of his child. For a single piercing moment, his rage cracked, and a sliver of desperate relief shone through. He followed the soft, ragged sound of breathing to a small alcove, shielded from the wind. And there she was. A woman, curled on the cold stone floor, her body a shield around the bundle in her arms. She was wrapped in a threadbare cloak, her dark hair matted with leaves and dirt, her clothes torn by the unforgiving forest. She looked exhausted, fragile like a winter bird, but even in her helpless state, she held the child with a tenderness that struck Kalen as profoundly wrong. This was a thief, a monster. She did not deserve to touch his son. He took a final predatory step into the alcove. "Put him down." Her head snapped up. Eyes the color of a storm-laden sky met his, wide, exhausted, but blazing with a defiance that stalled his breath. "He's burning up," she whispered, her voice raw. "The fever. I couldn't leave him. Please." Lies. All lies. Spun to save her own skin. Kalen's control snapped. In a blur of motion, he was upon her. One large hand clamped around her throat, not to crush, but to dominate. The sharp tips of his claws extended, pricking the delicate skin of her neck. A single drop of blood welled, its scent coppery and sharp. The pup in her arms whimpered weakly. And in that moment, as the child cried and her stormy eyes held his, her true scent finally reached him. It wasn't just fear. It wasn't just human sweat or forest grime. It was a fragrance that bypassed his rage and spoke directly to his soul. Wild lavender and midnight rain, sun-warmed stone, and something utterly uniquely her. It slammed into him with the force of a landslide, wrapping around his senses, searing a brand on his very being. Mate. The word was a thunderclap inside his skull. His wolf, which had been snarling for blood, fell utterly, completely silent. Then it howled, a sound of recognition, of longing, of primal claiming. Kalen's grip went slack. He stumbled back as if burred, his heart hammering against his ribs like a frantic prisoner. No, this was impossible, a cruel joke of the moon goddess. His fated mate could not be the wretch who stole his son. The woman, his mate, pressed a trembling hand to her throat, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. She didn't understand. She couldn't feel the cataclysmic shift inside him. "Who are you?" The words tore from his throat, ragged and rough. She drew the baby closer, a protective gesture that now sent a conflicting bolt of pain and approval through him. "Alara," she whispered. "My name is Alara. I didn't steal him, Alpha. I saved him." Saved him? From what? His vision swam, the world tilting on its axis. Tears spilled over her cheeks, cutting tracks through the dirt. But she held his gaze, unflinching. "From the one who sent me to take him." The very air in the ruins seemed to still and freeze. Kalen could hear the frantic beat of her heart, the soft wheeze of his son's breath, and the deafening roar of his own disbelief. "Who sent you?" The question was a growl, laced with a dread he had never known. Alara's lips trembled. When she spoke, her voice was a ghost of a sound, carrying a truth that promised to shatter his world. "Your own Beta, Kalen. Rylan sent me." The ground beneath Kalen's feet did not shake, but his soul did. Rylan, his brother, his right hand, the wolf who had stood with him through blood and fire. A coldness seeped into his bones, a chill far deeper than any mountain winter. The hunt for a thief was over. Now, the hunt for a traitor had begun. The silence in the ruined temple was absolute, more profound than any roar. Kalen stared at Alara, the woman who smelled of destiny and spoke of treason. His entire world, built on a foundation of pack loyalty and brute strength, trembled. His mate was a stranger, his brother was a traitor, his son was a fragile bundle between them, burning with fever. He forced his claws to retract. The sight of her blood on his own hand made his wolf snarl in self-loathing. "Command," he commanded, his voice stripped of its earlier murderous intent, now raw and dangerous in a different way. "Explain every word. If you lie to me, the bond will not save you." Alara drew a shivering breath, her arms tightening instinctively around the child. "Rylan came to the human settlement east of the Black River 3 nights ago. He wore a hood, but I know his scent. He offered a bag of gold so heavy it could buy 100 farms. He said the Alpha's son was sick, cursed by the old magic. He said the kindest thing, the only merciful thing, was to take the child away under the cover of night and let the forest claim him." A low growl rumbled in Kalen's chest, but he choked it back. "You accepted his gold?" "I refused," she defied him again, fierce and bright. "I told him I was a healer, not a killer. But then, later that night, a feeling, a terrible pull led me to the edge of your territory. I saw a small hidden gate left unguarded. I heard a baby cry, so weak, so alone. And I saw him, your son, wrapped in 2 thin linen, left on the cold ground near the back entrance, and again. It was a trap, but not for me, for him." Kalen's blood turned to ice. The back entrance was known only to his most trusted sentinels, and Rylan commanded the sentinels. "When I picked him up," Alara continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I saw it, on his tiny chest, beneath the blanket. A mark, like a burn in the shape of a crescent moon. It was pulsing with a faint, sickly light. This was no natural fever. This was dark magic. Someone had already tried to poison his fate before I ever arrived." The moon mark. The words screamed in Kalen's mind. An ancient legend spoke of a pup born under a crimson moon, bearing the goddess's own sigil. He would be a ruler of unprecedented power, a unifier, or a destroyer. The elders feared such power. Rylan knew the old tales better than anyone. "You took him to heal him," Kalen stated, the pieces crashing together with dreadful clarity. I tried. My herbs lowered the fever, but the mark, it resisted me. It needed pack magic, alpha magic. I was running to find a renegade wolf I once knew, someone who owed me a debt, who might know a counterspell. But your warriors were too fast. This ruin was the only shelter. She looked down at the child, her expression softening into pure, unguarded anguish. He is so small. He does not deserve this war that surrounds him. Kalen sank to his knees before her, the movement one of utter exhaustion. The alpha posture was gone. He was just a man, a father, staring at the two people fate had violently intertwined with his life. He reached out, not for her, but for his son. His fingers brushed the infant's fevered brow. The moment his skin touched the child's, a jolt passed through him, not just the heat of illness, but a spark, a faint, answering echo of power from the moon mark to his own alpha lineage. This prophecy was real. His son was marked, and his beta sought to extinguish that light forever. He gathered the child into his arms, the weight feeling both impossibly heavy and sacred. The pup nuzzled into his father's chest, and a pain so sharp it was physical lanced through Kalen. He looked at Ilara. Her storm-gray eyes were watching him, filled with a wary hope. The mate bond pulled at him, a relentless, warm current amidst the cold sea of betrayal. He could not leave her here. He could not let Ryland find her. "Can you walk?" he asked, his tone shifting into one of grim decision. She nodded, pushing herself up stiffly. "Where are we going?" "To my stronghold," Kalen said, rising with his son secured in the crook of his arm. "You will be a ghost within my walls, a servant in the lower kitchens. No one can know who you are or what you have told me, not until I have proof that turns Ryland's own lies against him." "You believe me?" The hope in her voice was a fragile thing. "I believe the terror in my son's scent when Ryland's name is spoken," Kalen said darkly. "I believe this mark, and I believe—" He hesitated, the words foreign on his tongue. "The moon goddess does not make mistakes with mates, even when I wish she had." He turned and walked out of the alcove, leaving her to follow. As they stepped into the gray dawn light, his warriors emerged from the shadows, their eyes wide at the sight of their alpha holding his pup and sparing the human woman. Kalen's gaze swept over them, his alpha mask slamming back into place. "The thief is dead. She fled into the gorge. The pup is safe. We return home, now. Speak of this to no one." It was his first lie to his pack, to protect the truth. And as Ilara fell into step behind him, her scent mingling with his and his son's, Kalen knew it would not be his last. The real war was just beginning, and it was waiting for them behind his own walls. The Shadow Moon stronghold was a beast of granite and grim history, carved into the very bones of the mountain. As Kalen led Ilara through the massive rune-etched gates, the weight of 1,000 watching eyes pressed down upon her. Warriors on the walls, mothers in doorways, elders in the square all fell silent and bowed as their alpha passed, their gazes flickering with curiosity and suspicion toward the ragged human trailing behind him. Kalen did not acknowledge them. He moved with a purposeful, unapproachable energy, his son a silent bundle against his chest. He took Ilara not to the dungeons, but through a network of narrow, little-used servant passages that wound like arteries deep into the heart of the keep. They emerged into a small, spare chamber near the bustling kitchens. It held a cot, a wash basin, and a single high window barred with iron. "This is where you will live," Kalen said, his voice devoid of the tumultuous emotion from the ruins. "You are Ilara, a refugee from a flooded village, given menial work out of the Alpha's charity. You speak to no one of the pup, of the mountains, or me. You keep your head down and your eyes open." Ilara hugged her thin cloak around her. "And how will I know what to look for?" Kalen's eyes pinned her in place. "Ryland will be nervous. He will be seeking information. He will send others to ask subtle questions. You will listen in the kitchens, in the washing yards. You will learn who is loyal to him and who whispers against me. Report only to me, and only when we are certain we are alone." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. Without looking back, he said, "The healer, Anya, will come to you later. She will treat your injuries and bring you proper clothes. "Do not speak of the moon mark to Anya, to anyone." Then he was gone, leaving Ilara in the cold stone silence. The reality of her situation crashed over her. She was trapped in the den of wolves, pretending to be a mouse, while the wolf she was bound to by some cosmic mistake held her life in his hands. The mate bond was a constant low hum in her veins, a confusing warmth that made her want to both run toward him and hide from him. The next few days passed in a blur of steam, soap, and subdued fear. Ilara scrubbed pots, peeled mountains of root vegetables, and folded endless linen. The pack women were not unkind, but they were wary, their conversations drying up when she drew near. She heard snippets, though. Talk of the Alpha's grim mood, of the increased patrols, of the Beta's growing influence in the Alpha's absence. And she saw Rylan. He was everything Kaylin was not, polished, charming, with a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He moved through the keep like a prince, dispensing praise and orders with equal ease. Once he passed through the kitchen, his gaze sweeping over the servants. It lingered on Ilara for a heartbeat too long. A faint, curious frown touched his lips before he moved on, leaving a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the stone walls. That night, as a freezing rain lashed the high windows, a soft knock came at Ilara's door. It was the healer, an older woman named Anya, with kind eyes and clever hands. She tended Ilara's cuts and bruises without comment, but her fingers paused on the faint, crescent-shaped scar on her inner wrist, a birthmark she'd always had. "An interesting mark, child," Anya murmured, her voice thoughtful. "Just a scar," Ilara said quickly, pulling her arm away. Anya's eyes met hers, sharp and knowing. Some scars are maps, some are promises. She said nothing more, but left a small jar of salve and an extra blanket. The unspoken message was clear. She was an ally, or at least not an enemy. Restless, Ilara waited until the keep was asleep before slipping out. She needed air, space. She found a desolate inner courtyard, open to the sky. The rain had stopped, and the crimson moon was hidden behind clouds. She didn't hear him approach. "You should not wander alone." She whirled. Kaylin stood in the archway, a towering silhouette. He was out of his formal alpha garb, dressed in a simple tunic with his hair damp from the rain. He looked younger and infinitely more wary. "I needed to breathe," she said, her heart doing that foolish, frantic beat it reserved only for him. He walked into the courtyard, stopping a few feet away. The space between them crackled with the unacknowledged bond. "What have you heard?" She reported the whispers, the heightened tension, the way Ryland's supporters seemed to grow bolder. Kaylin listened with his expression granted. When she finished, he simply nodded. "The healer, Anya, she saw my mark, my birthmark." Kaylin's head snapped up. "What mark?" The Shadow Moon stronghold was a beast of granite and grim history, carved into the very bones of the mountain. As Kaylin led Ilara through the massive, rune-etched gates, the weight of 1,000 watching eyes pressed down on her. Warriors on the walls, mothers in doorways, elders in the square, all fell silent and bowed as their alpha passed, their gazes flickering with curiosity and suspicion toward the ragged human trailing behind him. Kaylin did not acknowledge them. He moved with a purposeful, unapproachable energy, his son a silent bundle against his chest. He took Ilara not to the dungeons, but through a network of narrow, little-used servant passages that wound like arteries deep into the heart of the keep. They emerged into a small, spare chamber near the bustling kitchens. It held a cot, a wash basin, and a single high window barred with iron. "This is where you will live," Kaylin said, his voice devoid of the tumultuous emotion from the ruins. "You are Ilara, a refugee from a flooded village, given menial work out of the Alpha's charity. You speak to no one of the pup, of the mountains, or of me. You keep your head down and your eyes open." Ilara hugged her thin cloak around herself. "And how will I know what to look for?" Kaylin's golden eyes pinned her in place. "Rylan will be nervous. He will be seeking information. He will send others to ask subtle questions. You will listen in the kitchens, in the washing yards. You will learn who is loyal to him and who whispers against me. Report only to me and only when we are certain we are alone." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. Without looking back, he said, "The healer will come to you later. She will treat your injuries and bring you proper clothes. Do not speak of the moon mark to her, to anyone." Then he was gone, leaving Ilara in the cold, stone silence. The reality of her situation crashed over her. She was trapped in the den of wolves, pretending to be a mouse, while the wolf she was bound to by some cosmic mistake held her life in his hands. The mate bond was a constant low hum in her veins, a confusing warmth that made her want to both run toward him and hide from him. The next days passed in a blur of steam, soap, and subdued fear. Ilara scrubbed pots, peeled mountains of root vegetables, and folded endless linen. The pack women were not unkind, but they were wary, their conversations drying up when she drew near. She heard snippets, though. Talk of the Alpha's grim mood, of the increased patrols, of the Beta's growing influence in the Alpha's absence. And she saw Rylan. He was everything Kalen was not, polished, charming, with a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He moved through the keep like a prince, dispensing praise and orders with equal ease. Once he passed through the kitchen, his gaze sweeping over the servants. It lingered on Ilara for a heartbeat too long. A faint, curious frown touched his lips before he moved on, leaving a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the stone walls. That night, as a freezing rain lashed the high windows, a soft knock came to Ilara's door. It was the healer, an older woman named Anya with kind eyes and clever hands. She tended to Ilara's cuts and bruises without comment, but her fingers paused on the faint, crescent-shaped scar on Ilara's inner wrist, a birthmark she'd always had. "An interesting mark, child," Anya murmured, her voice thoughtful. "Just a scar," Ilara said quickly, pulling her arm away. Anya's eyes met hers, sharp and knowing. "Some scars are maps, some are promises." She said nothing more, but left a small jar of salve and an extra blanket. The unspoken message was clear. She was an ally, or at least not an enemy. Restless, Ilara waited until the keep was asleep before slipping out. She needed air, space. She found a deserted inner courtyard, open to the sky. The rain had stopped, and the crimson moon was hidden behind clouds. She didn't hear him approach. "You should not wander alone." She whirled. Kalen stood in the archway, a towering silhouette. He was out of his formal alpha garb, dressed in a simple tunic, his hair damp from the rain. He looked younger and infinitely more weary. "I needed to breathe," she said, her heart doing that foolish, frantic beat it reserved only for him. He walked into the courtyard, stopping a few feet away. The space between them crackled with the unacknowledged bond. "What have you heard?" She reported the whispers, the increased tension, the way Ryland's supporters seemed to grow bolder. Kalen listened, his expression granite. When she finished, he simply nodded. "The healer, Anya," Ilara ventured. "She saw my mark, my birthmark." Kalen's head snapped up. "What mark?" She held out her wrist. In the faint light, the pale crescent was just visible. Kalen crossed the distance in 2 strides, taking her wrist gently. His touch sent fire racing up her arm. He stared at the mark, then at her face, his eyes blazing with a sudden, shocking realization. "By the goddess," he breathed. "It is not a birthmark. It is the same sigil, the moon mark, but faded, dormant." He released her as if burned, raking a hand through his hair. "This is no coincidence. The goddess did not just pair us, she chose us. You are meant to be his protector, his guide." Ilara stared at her own wrists, the mundane suddenly feeling sacred and terrifying. "What does that mean?" "It means," Kalen said, his voice a low rumble of awe and dread, that the danger is even greater than I feared. Ryland isn't just trying to kill a pup. He is trying to obliterate a prophecy, and you, Ilara, are now the living proof he failed. From the shadows of a far corridor, unseen by either, a pair of eyes watched them. The informant had seen enough. Silently, they turned and disappeared into the dark, carrying a new urgent message for the beta. The ghost in the keep had been seen with the alpha, and she bore a very interesting mark. The atmosphere in the Shadow Moon stronghold thickened into something palpable, a stew of suspicion and unspoken alliances. Kalen played his part. The grieving, vigilant alpha focused on his recovered son. He named the child Lysander, a name from an old tongue meaning liberator. It was a quiet act of defiance. He spent hours in the healing chambers with Anya, learning to channel his alpha energy to soothe the destructive magic in the moon mark. With each session, the sickly pulse of the mark faded, replaced by a steady, healthy silver glow. Lysander grew stronger, his cries becoming hearty wails of life, not weakness. All the while, Kalen watched Rylan. His beta was the picture of loyal concern, heading patrols, managing disputes, always at Kalen's side with counsel. But the council had a new edge to it, suggestions that the pack's resources were strained by the constant alert, hints that the human refugee in the kitchens was a drain, a security risk. Gentle questions about the alpha's judgment in sparing a thief's life, even if she had perished. Kalen had selected with cold silence or blunt dismissals, letting Rylan believe his deception about Ilara's death still held. Ilara, for her part, lived in a state of heightened awareness. The encounter in the courtyard had changed something. The bond was no longer just a confusing pull. It was a shared secret, a shared purpose. She began to notice patterns. A particular guard who always seemed to be loitering near the kitchen entrance. A young she-wolf who delivered herbs from the storerooms and lingered to ask pointed questions about the night of the great hunt. One afternoon, while hauling water from the well, she overheard two of Ryland's lieutenants talking in low voices behind the grain store. "Not just about the pup anymore," one said. "The beta says the alpha's judgment is clouded, that he's been different since the human witch died, says he's obsessed." "The Council of Elders won't move without proof," the other grumbled. "They fear him too much." "Proof can be arranged. A challenge for the good of the pack doesn't need the council's blessing. It just needs an opportunity and a believable reason." Her blood ran cold. A challenge. Rylan was planning to overthrow Kalen, not just kill the heir. She had to warn him. Finding a moment alone with the alpha was nearly impossible. His movements were always watched. That evening, driven by desperation, she used a trick Anya had shown her, a simple calming tea meant for overworked warriors. She prepared a tray, her hands steady despite the tremor in her heart, and brought it to the door of the main hall where Kalen was hearing petitions. A guard blocked her way. "The alpha does not require refreshment." From inside, Kalen's voice, sharp and clear, cut through. "I do. Let her enter." The guard stepped aside, surprise on his face. Ilara carried the tray in, her head bowed. The hall was vast, with a high throne of carved obsidian. Kalen sat there, Ryland standing at his right hand like a shadow. Dozens of pack members filled the space, their eyes tracking the human servant. She approached the dais, knees weak. As she set the tray on a small table beside him, she dared a glance up. Their eyes met. She couldn't speak, couldn't form the words with Ryland's gaze boring into her back. But she let her fear, her urgency, shine in her eyes. Then, subtly, she flicked her gaze toward Ryland and back, and gave the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Kalen's expression did not change. He gave a minute nod, his fingers brushing hers as he took the cup. The electric jolt of the bond was their private message received. "Thank you, Ilara," he said, his voice neutral. "You may go." As she turned, Ryland spoke, his voice smooth as oil. "A diligence, girl. It is commendable that you provide for our alpha so personally." The implication hung in the air, poisonous. Ilara fled, her heart hammering. Had she just made everything worse? Later that night, the opportunity for a true meeting came in the worst way. A commotion erupted near the eastern wall, shouts, the clang of steel, an alarm, intruders. The entire fortress erupted into organized chaos as warriors scrambled to their posts. In the confusion, Kalen found her. He pulled her into a secluded armory, his grip firm. "What did you learn?" Breathlessly, she told him of the lieutenant's conversation. "They speak of a challenge, Kalen. They say your judgment is clouded because of me. They're building a case against you." Kalen's face was a mask of cold fury. "He moves faster than I anticipated. The intruder alarm is likely a diversion, a test of my control, or a pretext to move his own men into position." "What will you do?" "What an alpha must do," he said, but there was no arrogance in it, only a heavy resolve. "I will confront him, but not on his terms, on mine. I need the pack to see his treachery for themselves." He looked at her, a new plan forming in his eyes. "You said Anya saw your mark. Does she know its meaning?" "I think she suspects." "Good. Go to her, tonight. Tell her everything. She is respected by the elders. Her word carries weight. I need her to be ready." "Ready for what?" "For the truth to be revealed." He cupped her face suddenly, his touch startling in its tenderness. "You have been braver than any warrior, Alara. When this is over, I will spend a lifetime making up for the day I held a claw to your throat." Before she could respond, he was gone, melting back into the shadowy corridors, heading not towards the false alarm, but towards the heart of his stronghold, towards the chambers of his betraying Beta. The game was entering its final, dangerous phase. Rylan had made his gambit. Now, Kalen would checkmate him. The false alarm died down as quickly as it had begun. No intruders were found, only a confused sentinel who claimed he'd seen shadows moving. The tension, however, did not dissipate. It coiled tighter, a spring waiting to release. Kalen did not summon Rylan. Instead, as the first silver light of a normal, non-crimson moon touched the mountains, he called a full pack gathering at the sacred council ring, a flat, stone circle arena used for ceremonies and, on rare, grim occasions, for trials. The pack assembled under the pale moonlight, murmuring with anxiety. They saw their alpha standing in the center, his son Lysander held safely in Anya's arms at the ring's edge. They saw the severe faces of the three eldest pack elders, and they saw Alara, the human servant, standing near Anya, her presence causing a ripple of surprised whispers. Rylan arrived last, his expression one of polite confusion. "My alpha," he said, bowing with perfect deference. "You call us at this hour? Has a new threat emerged?" "The threat," Kalen's voice boomed across the silent ring, "has been among us for moons. It wears the face of a brother and drips with the poison of betrayal." The murmurs ceased. All eyes swung to Rylan. Rylan's mask of loyalty slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing icy calculation before the charming smile returned. "Kalen, my friend, the strain of these past weeks. Perhaps we should speak in private." "We will speak here," Kalen commanded, "where the moon goddess and every loyal member of Shadow Moon can bear witness." He began to pace, his gaze sweeping over his people. "My son was not taken by some random human thief. He was targeted, delivered to an assassin by someone who knew our patrols, our den's secrets, who had the authority to leave a gate unguarded." He stopped, pointing directly at Rylan. "You, Rylan, you offered gold to a human healer to kill my child, and when she refused, you used her compassion as a trap, leaving my sick son as bait, hoping the forest or my own rage would finish your dark work." Gasps echoed through the ring. Rylan laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. "This is madness, the ravings of a grief-stricken alpha. You would believe the word of some human you found in the woods over mine? Where is this supposed thief? She is dead by your own account." "She is not dead," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "She is here." He gestured to Alara. Every wolf's gaze burned into her. She stepped forward, her legs trembling, but her voice clear as she projected it across the stone circle. She told her story again, from Ryland's offer in the village to finding the marked child. She spoke not as a victim, but as a witness. When she held up her wrist, showing her own faint crescent mark, a new wave of shock passed through the elders. Anya stepped forward. I have seen both marks. The Alpha's sun bears the sigil of the crimson moon, a prophecy of unity. This woman bears its echo. She is the guide, the protector foretold in the very legends Beta Ryland claims to uphold. He did not just attempt to murder a pup, he attempted to murder our future. Ryland's composure finally shattered. Lies, all of it. This is a conspiracy. The Alpha, addled with this human's witchcraft, seeks to purge his loyal supporters. He turned to the pack, his voice rising to a fanatical pitch. He puts a human above his own kind. He trusts her over the wolf who has bled for you. Is this the leadership you want? A dangerous rumble started among a faction of the warriors, Ryland's men. The pack was fracturing before Kaelin's eyes. You want proof beyond the word of a mate bond you cannot sense? Kaelin's voice cut through the rumble like a blade. He reached into his cloak and threw a small, blood-stained cloth into the center of the ring. It was the insignia of the Beta, torn. It carries your scent, Ryland, and the scent of Wolfsbane, the poison you used to sicken him and activate the dark magic in the mark. It was the final, undeniable piece. The cloth Alara had given him, now presented not as her evidence, but as his own discovery. Ryland stared at it, his face twisting from fury into something desperate and wild. A piece of cloth, he sneered, but the conviction was gone from his voice. His supporters wavered, looking between their Beta and their enraged Alpha. The proof is there, Kaelin said, beginning to remove his heavy outer tunic, a traditional prelude to a dominance challenge. But if you deny it to the end, then we settle this as wolves, here, now, for the right to lead Shadowmoon. The ring fell into an absolute breathless silence. This was the moment Ryland had wanted, but not this, not exposed, cornered, with the pack's loyalty hanging by a thread. He had no choice but to accept or be branded a coward and a traitor. He snarled, his own clothes shredding as his shift began. For the true good of the pack, he roared, a last futile claim. As the two massive wolves, one gold-eyed and black-furred, one silver-eyed and gray-furred, faced each other in the sacred circle, Alara clutched Anya's arm. The happy ending felt a universe away. This was not an end, but a brutal, necessary beginning. The pack's future would be won or lost in the next few minutes, not with whispers and schemes, but with tooth and claw under the cold, watching moon. The air in the council ring was so still it felt like glass about to shatter. The only sounds were the low, warning growls vibrating from the throats of two colossal wolves. Kaelin, a massive beast of midnight fur with eyes like liquid gold. Ryland, a sleek silver-gray hunter with cold, calculating eyes, now blazing with desperate fury. Alara's breath caught in her throat. The mate bond was a live wire, humming with Kaelin's focused rage and a protective instinct so fierce it mirrored her own. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Lysander's future, her own, the very soul of the pack, hung on this clash. Ryland struck first, a feint to the left, then a lightning-fast lunge for Kaelin's flank. It was a dirty fighter's move, aimed to cripple, but Kaelin was not just strength, he was the heart of the pack. He moved with a power that was both brutal and graceful, twisting to meet the attack, his powerful jaws snapping shut on empty air where Ryland's shoulder had been. The fight was not the prolonged battle of legends. It was sharp, vicious, and final. Ryland fought with the cunning of a cornered rat, using every trick, aiming for eyes and tendons. But Kaelin fought with the righteous fury of a father and a betrayed Alpha. Each of Ryland's blows seemed only to fuel his resolve. The critical moment came when Ryland, panting and bleeding from a gash on his muzzle, tried to repeat his feint. This time, Kaelin anticipated it. He didn't dodge, he charged. The impact was a cannon shot of muscle and bone. He drove Ryland onto his back, pinning him with overwhelming weight, his teeth finding purchase at the betrayer's throat. A death grip. The ring was silent. This was the Alpha's right, the kill strike. Kalen's golden eyes blazed, looking down at the wolf who had been his brother, the wolf who had tried to murder his son. He could end it. One crunch and the threat would be gone. But then his gaze flickered to the edge of the ring, to Alara, her face pale but fierce, to Anya, holding a peacefully sleeping Lysander, unaware of the drama surrounding his life, to the pack, divided, terrified, waiting to see what kind of leader he truly was. Kalen loosened his jaw. He did not tear out Ryland's throat. Instead, he shifted back to his human form in a ripple of power, one foot planted on Ryland's chest, holding the now human Beta in the dirt. "Death is too clean for you, brother," Kalen's voice echoed, raw with emotion but unwavering. "You wished to poison my pack with lies and fear. You will live with the truth. You are branded traitor. You are outcast. Your name is stricken from our histories. You will wander, packless, scent-marked, so all who smell you will know your crime. That is your sentence. That is the mercy your treachery does not deserve, but that my son's future requires." It was a punishment worse than death for a wolf, to be alone, forever shunned. A collective shiver went through the crowd. This was not the act of a bloodthirsty tyrant, but of a just, devastatingly merciful ruler. Guards moved in, dragging a broken, silent Rylan away. The fight for the soul of Shadowmoon was over. Kalen had won without taking the final, vengeful step. He turned to his pack, his chest heaving. "The corruption is cut out. Let the wound heal clean. My loyalty is, and has always been, to you, to our future." He pointed to Lysander, then to Alara. "My son bears the moon mark. This woman, Alara, bears its guardian sigil. She is under my protection, and by the goddess's design, she is my fated mate. This is not a weakness. It is our strength reborn." The silence held for one more heartbeat. Then, from the elders, came a slow, respectful nod. From the warriors, a deep, unified howl of allegiance ripped through the night sky. The pack was whole again, its alpha stronger for his mercy, its path forward clear. But as Kalen's eyes met Alara's across the ring, sharing a look of exhausted, burgeoning hope, neither of them knew that Ryland's betrayal was merely the first leaf to fall in an ancient coming winter. In the days that followed, Shadowmoon Keep began to breathe again. The oppressive fog of suspicion lifted. Kalen, with a new, quiet authority, restructured the guard, promoting loyal wolves like Fenrir to positions of trust. Publicly, Alara was moved from the kitchens to serve as a dedicated aide to healer Anya, a respectable position that kept her close to Lysander and under a veil of legitimacy. Privately, she was given chambers adjacent to the nursery, connected by a private door to Kalen's own rooms. They were not a couple in any traditional sense, but the fortress of formality between them had crumbled. They shared meals in his solar, speaking of the pack, of Lysander's progress, of the strange, quiet pull of the bond that now felt less like a shackle and more like a tether to safe harbor. One evening, as a gentle snow dusted the mountains, they sat by his hearth. Lysander slept in a cradle between them. "You showed him mercy," Alara said softly, staring into the flames. I sighed, the sound weary. For years, I believed strength was shown in the finality of the kill, but that night I saw the pack's fear. Killing Rylan would have ended a threat, but it would have fed a legend of a ruthless alpha. Sparing him, punishing him with exile, that showed control. That showed justice has a heart. It's what Lysander will need to learn. The mark makes him a target for power. He must learn that true power protects. It does not just dominate. Alara's heart swelled. This was the man, the leader she was bound to. He will learn that from you. Their conversation was interrupted by a frantic knock. Fenrir entered, his face grim. "Alpha, the outcast, Rylan. Our scouts tracked him to the Silverspire border. He did not wander aimlessly. He was met." Kalen stood, all softness gone. Met? By whom? by riders, cloaked, on horses without pack scent. They took him. He went willingly. They headed east toward the barren wastes. East, the direction of nothing but forgotten tales and dead kingdoms. A cold unease settled in the room. Rylan was a spent weapon. Who would retrieve him? Double the patrols on the eastern passes, Kaelin ordered, and Fenrir, bring me the oldest lore keepers, the ones who remember the stories before the great packs divided. After Fenrir left, Elara felt a chill but had nothing to do with the snow. This isn't over, is it? Kaelin's hand found hers, a gesture of comfort that was becoming natural. It seems the roots of the tree are deeper and rodder than we knew. The lore keepers, two ancient wolves with milky eyes and voices like rustling parchment, were brought before Kaelin. When he asked about powers east of the wastes, about old organizations that might covet a moon-marked pup, they grew visibly afraid. The Order of the Shattered Moon, one whispered, as if saying the name aloud might summon them. They're a myth, a ghost story to scare pups. Tell me the ghost story, Kaelin commanded. Before the great packs, it is said all wolves were one, ruled by a council under the true full moon. But a faction believed the moon's power was too dangerous in the blood of the many. They sought to shatter its influence, to cull any line that showed strong lunar magic, any pup born with celestial signs. They were cast out, driven east. They vowed to return, to cleanse wolfkind of what they saw as a curse. The moon mark, it is the very sign they would see as the ultimate impurity to be destroyed. The myth was horrifyingly real. Rylan wasn't just an ambitious beta, he was a fanatic, a believer, and he had just been collected by the very order he served. That night, as Elara checked on Lysander, she noticed something new. The moon mark on her chest, usually a soft silver, was glowing slightly brighter, and the matching mark on her wrist tingled, not unpleasantly, but with a sense of alertness, as if it were a ward, sensing a distant approaching shadow. She rushed to Kaelin. He was studying old maps. Without a word, she showed him her glowing wrist. He placed a hand on Lysander's crib, feeling the same energy emanating from his son. "They are coming," he said, his voice grim. "The Order knows he lives, and they know about you." The peace they had fought for was an illusion. The walls of Shadowmoon were strong, but they were now a target for an enemy shrouded in ancient legend. The real battle for their future was not within the pack, but from in darkness outside it, one that saw the light in Lysander and Elara not as a promise, but as a threat to be extinguished. A tense vigilance settled over Shadowmoon. Kaelin's warriors trained with a new grim focus. The eastern passes were watched day and night. But the enemy they feared did not come with an army. They came with silence and with poison. It began with the night howls. They were wrong. Not the deep communal songs of Shadowmoon, but thin, piercing cries that echoed from impossible distances, scratching at the mind, bringing nightmares to the wolves and waking dread to the humans in the keep. Then the spring that fed the lower courtyards turned bitter overnight. 2 wolves who drank from it fell into a deep, enchanted sleep that not even Anya could break. The Order was not laying siege. They were sapping strength, testing defenses, and spreading fear. They were proving that their magic was older and stranger than pack strength. Amid the growing anxiety, Elara discovered her own role was changing. The tingling in her mark was a constant hum. One afternoon, while helping Anya tend to the sleeping wolves, she placed her marked hand on one sufferer's brow on instinct. A soft silver light, gentle as moonglow, emanated from her palm. Under its touch, the wolf's labored breathing eased, and the dark veins of poison under his skin receded. Anya watched astonished. "The Guardian's power," the healer breathed. "It is a purifying light. It counters their dark magic." Elara stared at her own hands. She was not just a guide or a protector in prophecy. She was a weapon, the perfect counter to the Order's shadowy arts. Kaelin, when he heard, looked at her with a new, fierce pride, but also a deeper fear. She was now their greatest asset and their most vulnerable target. The Order's next move confirmed it. A single arrow, fletched with black feathers, shot over the walls at twilight. It carried no message, only a cloth wrapped around its shaft. The cloth was from Alara's old dress, the one she'd worn in the ruins. Stuck to it with resin was a lock of hair, silver gray, coarse, wolf hair. Ryland's. The message was clear. We have your past. We have your betrayer. We are coming for what you protect. That night, Kaelin called a war council. We cannot wait for them to pick us apart from the shadows. We must take the fight to them. We must find their heart. The barren wastes are vast, Alpha, Fenrir argued. A hunting party would be exposed. A full war party would leave the keep defenseless. Then it will not be a war party, a clear voice said from the doorway. Alara stood there, her back straight. It will be a small group, swift and quiet, and I will lead it. The room erupted in protest. Kaelin's no was the loudest. Hear me, Alara's voice, bolstered by a certainty that came from the mark on her wrist, cut through the noise. Their magic is drawn to the mark and repelled by its light. I can find them. I can sense their corruption like a bad smell, and my touch can disable their spells. You need warriors for strength, yes, but you need me as your compass and your key. Kaelin saw the truth in her storm-gray eyes. She was no longer the woman he needed to protect. She was the partner he needed to fight beside. The bond mode thrums with her resolve, and he knew, with the painful, proud certainty, that she was right. A small group, he conceded, his voice thick. Fenrir, you choose 5 of your best trackers and ambush fighters. You move at dawn. You follow Alara's lead. Your only mission is to find the Order's sanctuary, learn its strength, and return. Do not engage unless you have no choice. He walked to Alara, placing his hands on her shoulders, ignoring the watching council. You come back to me, he ordered, his golden eyes burning into hers. You and Lysander are the future of my world. Do not make me live in a world that has none. She placed her marked hand over his heart, feeling its strong, steady beat. I will return. We have a lifetime for you to make up for that first meeting, remember? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. For the first time, the bond didn't feel like fate's chain, but like fate's gift, a connection to a courage that matched his own. As the small elite party prepared to slip into the pre-dawn gloom, Kaelin stood on the walls, watching Alara, clad in dark, practical leathers, become one with the shadows. She looked back once, her mark glowing faintly on her wrist like a steadfast star. Then she was gone, into the maw of the wastes, carrying the pack's hope with her. The barren wastes earned their name. It was a landscape sculpted by despair, twisted rock formations that clawed at a gray sky, dust that stung the eyes and choked the breath, and a silence so complete it felt predatory. The sun, when it pierced the perpetual haze, was a pale, sickly eye offering no warmth. Alara led not by sight, but by feel. Her mark on her wrist was her guide. It pulsed with a gentle, warm light when they were on the right path, and dimmed to a cold, warning throb when they neared patches of land that felt wrong. Places where the very earth seemed scarred by old, malicious magic. Thanks to her, they avoided several traps, sinkholes disguised by illusion, patches of grounds that would have erupted in dark flames. Fenrir and his warriors watched her with growing respect. She was human, but she moved with a wolf's silence and possessed a sense they lacked. She was their beacon in the desolation. On the third day, they found the first sign of the Order, a crude altar of black stone, stained with old dark substances. Carved into it was a symbol, a full moon cracked down the middle, the shattered moon. The air around it was thick and foul, and the mark on Alara's wrist burned with such intense cold she gasped. She approached, her hand outstretched. As her fingers neared the stone, her mark flared, brilliant silver. The foul energy around the altar hissed and dissipated like steam. The warriors felt the oppressive weight lift. "Their magic is weak against your light," Fenrir murmured, awe in his voice. Ilara nodded, but she was worried. The altar was old, its power residual. If this was the edge of their territory, how powerful would the heart be? They pressed on, deeper into a labyrinth of canyons. The mark led them to a narrow, hidden pass between two sheer cliffs. As they entered, the temperature dropped dramatically, and then they heard it. The distant, rhythmic clang of a hammer on metal, and the low, unified chant of many voices. The scent of smoke and something metallic like ozone reached them. Crawling to the rim of a vast, sunken crater, they looked down upon the heart of the order. It was not a fortress, but a monastery of madness. Built into the crater walls were cells and forges. In the center stood a grotesque temple shaped like an inverted moon, its surface black and reflective. Dozens of figures, hooded and cloaked, moved about. Some were clearly wolves, moving with animal grace. Others seemed human. And chained to posts near the temple, looking broken and used, was Rylan. He was not a guest. He was a resource, being drained for information and blood for their dark rites. But what made Ilara's blood freeze was the focus of their activity. On a raised dais before the temple, they were constructing a device, a massive, complex lattice of black iron and crystal, shaped like a cage, and at its center was a space, perfectly sized for an infant. Above it, suspended, was a jagged shard of obsidian carved into the shape of a fang. "A corruption engine," Fenrir breathed, his wolf's eyes seeing the deadly intent. "They don't just want to kill the marked one, they want to use his pure lunar energy, twist it and turn it into a weapon of blight. They could poison whole territories with it." The scale of the threat was monstrous. This was bigger than one pack, one pup. Ilara understood now. The goddess hadn't just given her a bond to an alpha, she'd given a healer a weapon to fight a plague. They had seen enough. Their mission was to scout and return, but as they began their careful retreat, a stray stone loosened under a warrior's boot. It clattered down the cliff face. In the crater below, every hooded head snapped up. A piercing alarm shrieked, not from a horn, but from a twisted magical artifact. Dozens of glowing eyes turned toward their hiding spot. They were discovered. "Run!" Fenrir commanded. "Back to the pass. We must warn the Alpha." They fled, the warriors forming a protective ring around Ilara. Arrows, fletched with black feathers and humming with dark energy, began to zip past them, shattering on the rocks where they struck. One grazed a warrior's arm, and the flesh immediately began to blacken and wither. Ilara didn't hesitate. She slapped her glowing palm over the wound. The darkness receded, the wound healing to a clean cut, but the effort drained her, and the light from her mark dimmed noticeably. They burst out of the canyon pass, just as their pursuers, swift and silent as ghosts, emerged from the shadows behind them. The barren wastes, so empty before, now seemed alive with menace. The race for home had become a desperate flight for survival, with the fate of two worlds resting on their success. The flight from the barren wastes was a nightmare of endurance and terror. The Order's hunters were relentless, moving with an uncanny speed that seemed fueled by dark magic rather than muscle. They did not howl or shout. They pursued in a chilling silence, their presence a cold pressure on the back of Ilara's neck. Her mark, drained from healing the warrior, was now a constant, dull ache. It still guided them, pulling her toward the distant, safe anchor of Kylin in Lysander, but its light was faint. They ran through what remained of the day and into the starless night, stopping only when the wolves among them threatened to collapse. During a brief, panting rest in a shallow cave, Fenrir checked their back trail. His face was grim. "They are gaining. They do not tire. We must split up." "No," Ilara gasped.
We stay together. My light is the only thing that counters their arrows. If they pick us off alone, we are all lost." "Then we make our stand," growled one of the warriors, Bren. "We turn and fight, give you and Fenrir a chance to get to the Alpha." Alara looked at their tired, resolute faces. These wolves, who had once seen her as a suspicious human, were now ready to die for her, for the future she represented. The bond she felt with Kayellen extended in that moment to his whole pack. They were her family now, too. "We do not make a stand," she said, a new idea forming, born of desperation and her healer's instincts. "What if we lead them where the land itself fights back?" Fenrir's eyes gleamed. "The Singing Woods, to the north. The trees there, they react to dark magic. The pack avoids it. It's unstable ground." It was a dangerous gamble. The Singing Woods were feared for a reason, but it was their only chance. They changed course, pushing their exhausted bodies toward the eerie forest. As dawn broke, they reached its edge. The trees were tall and pale, with leaves that chimed like glass in the wind, a beautiful, unsettling sound. The moment Alara, with her dimly glowing mark, stepped beneath the canopy, the chiming grew louder, more agitated. They plunged inside. Minutes later, the Order's hunters reached the tree line. They hesitated. Their leader, a tall figure with a staff topped with the shattered moon symbol, pointed. They entered. The forest came alive. Roots snaked from the ground, tripping the hunters. Branches lashed out like whips. The chiming became a deafening, discordant shriek that seemed to disorient the cloaked figures. Their own dark magic sparked and sputtered against the wood's innate, chaotic defense. It was working. The forest was buying them time. But the effort of channeling her will, of staying connected to the guiding pull of her mark while navigating the hostile woods, was too much for Alara. As they neared the western edge, where the familiar scent of Shadow Moon territory began to mix with the strange air of the woods, her legs buckled. Fenrir caught her before she hit the ground. "I just need a moment," she whispered, her vision swimming. They were so close, they could see the green of the pine forests that marked packland, but the sounds of struggle behind them were fading. The Order was breaking through the wood's defenses. "Bren, take her," Fenrir ordered, setting Alara on her feet with the younger warrior's support. "Run. Do not stop. Howl the alarm when you clear the tree line. The rest of you, with me. We give them one more surprise in these singing trees." Alara wanted to argue, to stay, but she had no strength left. Bren half-carried, half-dragged her the last 100 yards. As they burst from the tree line into the blessed normal sunlight of the pine forest, Bren tipped his head back and let out a long, piercing howl of alarm. "Intruders! Battle! To the Alpha!" The howl was answered almost instantly from the nearby ridges. Shadow Moon was listening. Back in the Singing Woods, the sounds of a fierce, final clash erupted. Then silence. Tears streamed down Alara's face as Bren helped her toward the approaching thunder of paw beats. She had made it. The warning would get through. But Fenrir and the others, they had bought their future with their lives. The first patrol found them moments later. Seeing Alara's state and hearing Bren's gasped report, they swept them up and raced for the keep. Alara, slumped in the arms of a huge gray wolf, looked back once at the sinister, chiming tree line. The fight in the wastes was over. The war for Shadow Moon was about to begin. The return to Shadow Moon Keep was a somber victory. Alara's warning, purchased with the blood of Fenrir and his brave warriors, spread through the pack like wildfire. Grief for the fallen was sharp, but it was forged immediately into a steely resolve. They had a name for the enemy now, the Order of the Shattered Moon. They knew its face, its madness, and its terrible goal. Kayellen's war council was no longer about patrols and suspicion. It was a war room. Maps of the eastern approaches were laid out, and Alara, though exhausted, stood beside Kayelin, describing the crater monastery, the corruption engine, and the enemy's numbers as best she could. "They will not lay a long siege," Kayelin said, his finger tracing a path from the Singing Woods to the keep. "They use fear and magic. They will come swiftly, hoping to shatter our will before we can mount a unified defense. Their target is not the walls, it's the nursery." He looked at Alara, his gaze unwavering. "You are our greatest defense. Your light negates their darkness, but you cannot be everywhere." "Then we do not let them choose where to strike," Alara said, her voice stronger now, fed by purpose. "We use the mark, both of them." She held up her wrist, the sigil now glowing with a steady, determined light as her strength returned. "Lysander's mark calls to them. It's a beacon, and mine answers. We can turn that connection against them." Anya, the healer, stepped forward, her eyes alight with understanding. "A ward, not just to keep them out, but to trap their magic. If we can channel the pure lunar energy of the Alpha's air through the Guardian's sigil, we could create a field around the keep. Their corrupt spells would unravel at the borders." It was a daring, untested plan. It required Alara and Lysander to be at the heart of the defense, exposed and vulnerable. It required absolute trust from the pack. Kayelin looked from his son to his mate, his heart in his throat. Then he nodded. "We prepare the ward. All warriors, all those who can fight, will form concentric rings of defense from the outer walls to the inner sanctum. We fight not just with tooth and claw, but with light and legacy."
For 2 days, the keep became a hive of sacred preparation. Under Anya's direction, runes of protection were carved at every gate and threshold. The oldest rituals were recited. Alara spent hours in the nursery, holding Lysander, letting their marks resonate together, learning to feel the pulse of his innocent power and harmonize it with her own guardian energy. Kalen was always nearby, a protective, steady presence, his own alpha power a comforting, solid bedrock beneath their more ethereal connection. On the dawn of the 3rd day, the scouts' howls came, a single, sustained note of supreme warning. They are here. From the high battlements, Kalen and Alara watched as the enemy emerged from the tree line. They were not an army, but a procession of nightmares, perhaps 50 figures, hooded and cloaked, moving with a silent, unified purpose that was more terrifying than a charge. At their head was the tall figure with a staff, and beside him, shuffling and broken, was Rylan, a living testament to their cruelty. Behind them, carried by 6 strong acolytes, was the ominous black lattice of the corruption engine. The air grew cold and thick as they approached. The sky, which had been clear, began to swirl with unnatural, bruised-looking clouds. The order stopped just outside bowshot range. The leader raised his staff, and his voice, amplified by magic, rolled across the field, dry as a tomb. "Alpha of Shadow Moon, you harbor an abomination. Surrender the child of the cursed moon. Your pack will be spared the cleansing fire. Keep your defiance, and you will be unmade, and your territory will be sown with salt." Kalen's answer was not shouted. He simply nodded to Alara. She closed her eyes, holding a peacefully sleeping Lysander against her chest with one arm. With her other hand, she pressed her marked wrists against his tiny back, where his own sigil lay. She reached for the bond, not just the mate bond with Kalen, but the deeper, older bonds between guardian and charged. She felt the pure, moon-bright energy of the child, a wellspring of potential. She did not take it, she channeled it. A ripple of silver light pulsed out from them both, visible to every wolf and human in the keep. It washed over the stones, causing the protective runes to flare with brilliant blue-white light. a dome of shimmering energy, faint like a he-haze, but palpable, solidified over the entire stronghold. The Order's leader hissed in fury. He slammed his staff on the ground. A bolt of crackling black energy shot toward the main gate. It struck the shimmering ward and did not explode. Instead, it sizzled, writhed like a dying snake, and dissolved into harmless sparks. A roar of triumph went up from the Shadow Moon warriors on the walls. The siege had begun. The Order launched wave after wave of dark magic, shards of ice that burned with cold fire, waves of disabling fear, vines of shadow that sought to climb the walls. Each spell broke against the ward powered by the union of Lysander's destiny and Ilara's will. But with each assault, Ilara flinched. She felt the impact like a blow to her own soul. Channeling this much power was an immense strain. Sweat beaded on her brow, and her legs trembled. Kalen saw. He placed a hand on her shoulder, pouring his own strength, his unwavering stability into her through their mate bond. "Hold fast, my light. They are the ones who are breaking." And they were. Frustrated, the Order fell back. They began assembling the corruption engine at the ward's edge, its jagged obsidian fang glinting wickedly. This was their final weapon, designed to pierce and poison lunar energy itself. "Now," Kalen said, his voice a battle cry that echoed from the walls. "Warriors of Shadow Moon, for our future, attack!" The gates swung open, not to let the enemy in, but to let Shadow Moon out. Kalen, in his mighty black wolf form, led the charge, a golden-eyed avatar of fury. His wolves poured out after him, a river of fang and fur, crashing into the stunned ranks of the Order. The battle was chaos. Magic clashed with muscle. Howls of battle mixed with the sizzle of dark spells, deflected by the ward at their backs. Kalen fought his way toward the corruption engine, a one-beast wrecking crew. Ilara, watching from the battlements with Anya guarding her, saw Rylan break free from his handlers, not to fight for the Order, but in a final mad dash toward the keep, toward Kalen. He shifted into his ragged wolf form, aiming to tackle the Alpha from behind. "Kalen!" Ilara screamed. Kalen turned, but he was beset by two cloaked acolytes. Rylan was a bark beat from his exposed flank. And then, something extraordinary happened. Lysander, stirred by the cacophony and his mother's cry, opened his eyes, not to cry, but to stare with infant focus at the scene below. His moon mark blazed with a sudden, stunning light. That light lanced from the battlements, not from Ilara, but from the child himself. A pure, concentrated beam of silver that struck Rylan mid-leap. The outcast Ada did not explode or burn. He simply stopped. He shifted back to human form, unharmed but utterly still. The hatred and madness had been washed from his eyes, replaced by a vacant, awestruck peace. The direct, purifying light of the prophecy had not killed him. It had unmade the corruption within him, leaving only a hollow shell. This sight made the Order's leader falter. His ultimate weapon, the corruption engine, was now unprotected. With a roar that shook the battlefield, Kalen tore through the last acolyte and slammed his full weight into the black lattice. It did not shatter from strength alone. As he touched it, the protective, purifying energy from the ward, from Ilara and Lysander, coursed through him and into the machine. There was a sound like 1,000 mirrors breaking. The corruption engine erupted into a shower of harmless black sand and inert crystal. The obsidian fang turned dull gray and crumbled to dust. Their weapon was gone. Their fanaticism wavered. Seeing their leaders stare in disbelief at his shattered staff, the will of the Order broke. They began to retreat, melting back into the tree line, becoming ghosts once more. The field fell silent, save for the panting of victorious wolves and the soft, chiming cry of Lysander, his great work done. The following days were for healing, for mourning, and for rebuilding. The bodies of the fallen, both friend and foe, were given rites. The land where the dark magic had been cast was cleansed by Ilara and Anya, her light now stronger and more assured than ever. Rylan, empty of malice but broken in mind, was placed under gentle guard. He was a victim of the Order as much as a perpetrator, a living reminder of the cost of fanaticism. But over everything hung a profound, hard-won peace. The Order was shattered, its heart broken, its survivors scattered to the winds. The message was clear. The mark of the moon was under the protection of an Alpha of justice and a guardian of light. It would not be threatened again. A week after the battle, under the soft light of a healthy silver full moon, Kaelin called the pack to the council ring once more. This time, there was no tension, only a united, hopeful silence. He stood in the center, not as a warrior, but as a father and a leader renewed. In his arms, he held Lysander, who gurgled happily. Beside him stood Ilara, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her storm-gray eyes clear and bright. "My people," Kaelin's voice rang out, warm and strong. "We have faced the darkness within and the darkness without. We have been tested in fire and shadow, and we have emerged not just unbroken, but united as never before. We have lost brave hearts, and their memory will forever be our strength." He looked down at his son, then at Ilara, love shining openly in his golden eyes for all to see. "We have also gained. We have gained a future, bright with promise. We have gained a protector whose courage and light saved us all." He took Ilara's hand, lifting her marked wrist. "By the moon goddess's design, Ilara is my fated mate. She is the guardian of our heir and the healer of our pack's soul. From this day forward, she stands as my equal, as your Luna, in heart and in honor." The title was traditional, but the meaning was new. It was not a political appointment, but a recognition of a bond that had saved them all. The pack's response was not a formal howl, but a rising, joyful chorus of approval, a sound of pure acceptance that brought tears to Ilara's eyes. Kaelin turned to her fully, the world fading away. "You told me once we had a lifetime for me to make up for our first meeting," he said softly, for her ears only. "Will you let me begin that lifetime now? Not as Alpha in obligation, but as Kaelin and Ilara. Will you build this new world with me?" Ilara's smile was the dawn after a long night. She placed her hand over his heart, feeling its steady, sure beat. "There is nothing in this world or the next I would rather do," she whispered back. And there, under the benevolent moon, surrounded by their pack, their family, he kissed her. It was not a kiss of frantic passion, but of a promise sealed, a promise of partnership, of respect, of a deep and abiding love that had been forged in trust and tempered in battle. It was a new beginning. The celebration that followed lasted into the night. There was music, feasting, and stories of bravery. Lysander was passed among admiring pack members, his moon mark now a symbol of hope, not fear. As the festivities began to wind down, Kaelin and Ilara slipped away, walking hand in hand to a quiet balcony overlooking their thriving territory. The scars of battle were still there, but green shoots were already pushing through the scorched earth. "He will have a good life here," Ilara said, leaning her head against Kaelin's shoulder as they looked down at their sleeping son in his arms. "A peaceful one." "He will," Kaelin agreed, his voice a contented rumble, "because he has a mother who moves mountains with her will, and a pack that knows its strength lies in its heart." He looked at her, his gaze full of a wonder that would never fade. "You were the greatest surprise of my life, Ilara. My punishment turned into my purpose, my hunt that led me to my home." Ilara looked up at the moon, then at the man beside her, her mate, her partner in every sense. The bond between them was quiet now, a gentle, warm hum of perfect understanding. The storm had passed. The crimson moon was gone, replaced by a gentle silver. The Alpha had found his mate. The Guardian had found her charge. The pack had found its future, and in the quiet of the mountain night, under a sky full of hopeful stars, they stood together, whole, healed, and home at last. The end.